let's get to Leicester last week, where on Sunday, Michael van Gerwen won his 6th World Grand Prix title, holding off a brave fight back in the final from Nathan Aspinall to win it 5-3. Brings us on to our first of 2 questions of the week that we've got for you guys this week. Lots of debate on this last week on social media, and it seemed like at the venue as well on who is the best player in the world right now. Our poll, the options are Michael van Gerwen, Gerwin Price, Peter Wright, or other. Who are you going with?
I'm going to go with Michael van Gerwen. And the thing that we've harped on about for a couple of years now that had been missing from his game is there now. The consistency and that ability to play near his best across an entire week, across an entire tournament. He didn't at the World Match Play, but he came pretty close. He was playing at a good standard most of the time, but he played at a very high standard the entire week in Leicester. That's what he was doing almost every tournament for 4 or 5 years as he became one of the 2 greatest players of all time. For him to be able to have a tournament where he did that and to throw, okay, the average is well in the 90s, but that's because it was double in. The rule of thumb is add 10 points to that average, and Darts Oracle can correct us and say exactly what you should be adding to the average. But that's the rule of thumb. Well, that means he was playing at that 100 average across the week. And okay, especially in the early rounds, he was so good at getting in that it really wasn't like he was losing that much on his average by having to double from the start. But it does have some effect. He played at that for a week, and he was really never in serious trouble. Yes, he went to a last set decider against Stephen Bunting, but he was the better player. And yes, he let Nathan Aspinall back into the match from 4-0 up, but he was the better player, and he had that cushion that even though he kind of went off the boil and a few points came off his average across those 3 sets, he still had that buffer that he could then get it together when he needed to and win a set 3-1 to finish off the match. Michael van Gerwen may have been a couple points below his very best, but Michael van Gerwen at his very best was more than a couple points better than everyone else. And when you add in that consistency that he used to have and that he had this week, it made him all the more unplayable. He's still beatable, and there still are going to be doubts because he hasn't done this every single tournament. He hasn't done this every single week like he used to. And that means he's not the same player or at that same level that he was before. But he is right now the best player in the world. And this past week, he showed it. And in the World Match Play, he pretty much showed it. And at the key moments across the Premier League campaign, he showed it. He's still vulnerable. He's still much more vulnerable than he was 5 years ago. But that doesn't mean he's not the best player. I don't even think right now it's that close. He's a good level ahead of anyone else. Not, again, the 4 or 5 levels. He was ahead of Gary Anderson 5 years ago, and 10 levels he was ahead of everyone else. But he's still a level ahead of everyone else, and that makes him the best player in the world.
I think I'm with you on this one. And at the time of recording, we've had more than 500 votes on our poll on Twitter for This Is Running for the rest of the week. So do go and vote if you haven't already. But 81% of our listeners going with you and with me, with Michael van Gerwen, 10% going with Gerwin Price, 4% going with Peter Wright, 5% going with other. I'm not sure who they go with on the other, but you look at everything that we've seen so far this year, the year to date, the ranking money, that title that Michael van Gerwen picked up at the weekend, he's now more than £200,000 clear of second place, which is Danny Noppert at the moment. And you mentioned about our friends at Darts Oracle. You look at the stats from the start of this season to now, Michael van Gerwen is top of the averages, almost, over half a point clear of Damon Heta in second place. And the 2 other players that we mentioned, almost a full point clear of Peter Wright, more than a point clear of Gerwin Price, and the titles as well. The one on Sunday, that's 9 titles now for this season, closing in on double figures. And, at the last, probably the best part of 3 years, it's felt like one of the most open eras in the PDC. And we'll come on to talk about the 30 years of the PDC that they've put out on social media today when we're talking. But you look back to a lot of those 30 years, they've been dominated by either Phil Taylor or Michael van Gerwen. But Michael van Gerwen, he's had 2 long runs without lifting big silverware. Okay, the first run, March to November 2020, 4 of those months, no one was playing because everyone was locked down. But you look at from that Players' Championship Finals title at the end of 2020, he won a World Series event in 2021. But in terms of those TV ranking events or an event like the Premier League or the Masters, it was the best part of 18 months between a big title. But now he's starting to pick off these titles pretty regularly, isn't he? The Premier League, the World Match Play, now the World Grand Prix is starting to feel like more of a dominant era again for Michael van Gerwen. And yeah, there's still a lot for him to do to get back to those levels of when he was at his peak, or maybe that might have been his first peak, but that is now back-to-back TV ranking titles for him. And that's the first time that he's done that since late 2017. And for me, that is quite significant. And when you look at those three players at the top of the rankings, Peter Wright now back to number one, Price number two, Michael van Gerwen number three. I think when you put all of them together, when they're playing at their A game, they are all capable of beating each other. I don't think anyone there's a huge gap in the standard between all three of them on their day. But based on what we've seen this year, you have to say that Michael van Gerwen right now, he is that top player. And when he's winning these big titles again, okay, he's had some sticky moments in all three of those, and particularly in the finals as well. The match play final, come from behind to beat Gerwin Price. The Premier League, Joe Cullen had that match start, and the final on Sunday, Nathan Aspinall 4-0 down, 2 darts to force it to a deciding set. So he's come through three of the biggest finals and he's won them all. And he often says there's more in the tank. There's a lot to be said, though, for just simply winning these titles. And for someone who made it a habit, then seemingly lost the know-how to do it for a little while, to get it back and still not be at his peak, it says a lot for me. And yeah, I think Michael van Gerwen right now, he is the best player in the world. And if he carries on, you would be brave to back against him being the best in the world by rankings come early January next year.